Again, welcome to those who are on Zoom. We appreciate you all being with us this afternoon. We are going to go ahead and get started. Um, Again, if you can check in with us in the chat and just let us know where you're coming in from, that would be great. Alrighty, so welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Zaria Davis. I am your moderator for the Unlock Higher Ed Race and Equity in Prison Higher Ed program this afternoon. This is a discussion on state and federal legislation to support higher ed programs. The Unlock Higher Education was born out of a strong need to center the voices and leadership of formerly incarcerated scholars and professionals to the forefront in matters of advocacy, public education, and policy reform at a local, state, and federal level. We believe that higher education creates pathways to financial stability and increased opportunities. So we will now hear from Dr. Noel Vest on the history of the coalition. Welcome, Noel.
Thanks, Zaria. I have a huge smile on my face, and it probably won't disappear the entire time. It's such a pleasure to be a part of this event. I'm so honored to be here with people that I consider personal heroes of mine. As far as for those that don't know me, my name is Dr. Noel Vest. I am a research fellow here at Stanford University, working in Keith Humphrey's Addiction and Policy Lab. I think probably most important to this conversation, I am the proud product of a college and prison program through the College of Southern Nevada while I was serving a 7-year prison sentence at High Desert State Prison. And so it brings just incredible joy to me to be here today. So Zaria gave a really good explanation of kind of what Unlock Higher Ed is about. You know, we are definitely about advocating and pushing forward the voice of formerly incarcerated individuals into advocacy, public education, and policy reform. And we feel that those voices are, very, very important when we're advocating on these issues. So we focus our work mainly in 3 areas. Number 1 is Pell restoration for all incarcerated individuals, regardless of crime or length of sentence. Number 2, removal of question 23 from the FAFSA, better known as the drug question. And then what you'll hear quite a bit about today is ban the box in higher education initiatives at the federal and state level. And myself and Zaria and Stan and Annie Phoenix and quite a few other people here at Unlock Higher Ed have been doing this work for quite a few years now. And like I say, it's just such a pleasure for me to be a part of this and to be able to lend my voice to these issues. And with that, I'll send it back.
I just want to go over a few housekeeping things really quickly. One is, if you have any questions, we ask that you put it in the Q&A section, just so we don't miss that in the chat. And then in addition, there will be several poll questions that we're going to ask you to participate in, because we really believe that your voice is important in this space. And so again, we're going to hear from some different awesome leaders doing this work. We'll be hearing from several individuals in regards to restoration of the Pell Grant, as well as statewide ban the box efforts. And before we do the video, I'm going to ask Noel to just give a quick state update, and then just go back into the introduction of the video.
All right. So for anyone on the call that doesn't know, members of the Unlock Higher Ed Coalition have been involved in passing ban the box in higher education legislation in all of the states up until this year that have passed that legislation. So Maryland, Louisiana, Washington, and Colorado up until this year. I do want to kind of bring everyone up to date on some recent developments as far as Ban the Box initiatives. And again, for those that may not be aware, Ban the Box initiatives, at least as it relates to college applications, is for the removal of these discriminatory questions on college applications. So the criminal history box on college applications. And again, bringing everyone up to date, California has recently passed probably the most comprehensive and encompassing Ban the Box in higher ed bill to date. SB 118 by Senator Nancy Skinner was recently passed. It was definitely not all Unlock Higher Ed, but along with Unlock Higher Ed, advocates at Root and Rebound and Project Rebound and the 20MM Foundation, people like Andrew Wynn and Sonia and many others had a huge part in that, but we also had a fairly large role in that. I'm going to put in some media coverage into the chat around that bill, and people can kind of take a look at what's happened here in California. I also want to point out some really recent work has been done in Pennsylvania. So last Wednesday, Pennsylvania, Morgan Cephas and Representative Orzate introduced HB 2952. We had some people that are probably on this call that were involved. Divine Linscomb testified in support of it. And so just kind of pointing out, if you live in Pennsylvania, please reach out to your local lawmakers and let them know that you support this bill. I'll put some media coverage around this bill in the chat, and if we could please share this across social media platforms. And if you want to help in any kind of Ban the Box effort in your state, please reach out to Unlock Higher Ed or reach out to myself personally, and would definitely like to help anyone on the call get started in that area. And I'll throw it back to you, Zaria, with those after those state updates.
Thank you. So now we will go to our video, which was sent by Senator Schatz, who was unable to join us today. So we ask that you just take a minute and listen to the video, and then we will move on to our next speaker. Thank you.
Aloha, I'm Senator Brian Schatz, and I just wanted to thank you for your hard work and your advocacy. We know that higher education is the best way to help people to re-enter their communities, providing them with the skills and the knowledge essential to their futures. And that consensus is due in large part to the efforts that you're leading on the ground to help people to rebuild their lives. In Congress, I'm working alongside you. I'm fighting to pass the REAL Act and the Beyond the Box for Higher Education Act. These bills will make higher education more accessible for people in prison and people returning to their communities. It's good policy and it's the right thing to do, and it will mean that our communities are safer, we're going to save taxpayer dollars, and we'll end the cycle of recidivism. I'll keep fighting until we get it done. Thank you for your partnership and your commitment.
Thank you, Senator Schatz, for your work and your commitment in this effort that we are fighting for. Next, we're going to have Topeka Sam provide comments on this issue and how it impacts incarcerated women and any other things that she would like to share. Topeka is the founder and executive director of the Ladies of Hope Ministries. While in federal prison, Topeka witnessed firsthand the epic and disparity of incarceration on women, more specifically women of color. She felt the urgency to bring the faces and voices of women in prison to the public in order to bring awareness to women's incarceration and post-incarceration issues in order to change the criminal legal system. After her release in 2015, in response to what she saw and learned in prison, she created the Ladies of Hope Ministry, an organization whose mission is to help disenfranchised and marginalized women transition back into society through education, entrepreneurship, spiritual empowerment, and advocacy. Topeka is a 2017 Soros Justice Fellowship, 2015 Beyond the Bars Fellow, and a 2016 Justice and Education Scholar, both at Columbia University. We want to go ahead and welcome and bring Topeka on. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And so I'm just going to share a little bit about my experience. As a young girl living in suburbia, I was told that I had to be 100% better and smarter and swifter than my white friends. I didn't understand that statement, the better part, as I thought that we all were the same. We grew up next door to one another. We went to the same schools, on the same school bus together. I was captain of every varsity team and president of every club. And I laugh often and say that I was president of the Spanish club and didn't even speak Spanish. We swam in each other's pools. We ate at each other's dinner tables. It wasn't until I was about 10 years old when one of my friend's dads at the dinner table said to me that you are better than Black. And I asked, well, what does that mean? And he continued by saying, well, your parents are educated and they own a business and they aren't like other Black people, at least the ones that I have to put in jail. He was the local sheriff. And I said, well, what is jail? I knew that didn't sound correct because I went to Harlem School of the Arts on the weekends and took piano and flute and dance lessons. And, the other children that looked like me were there too. So they were just like me. And I went home and told my parents what had happened. And let's just say from that point, I was no longer allowed to go back there or allowed to spend the night at that friend's house or any other friend's house for that matter. So going to college was never a doubt in my mind. My parents told me that I was going from a child. I actually wanted to be a lawyer and I wanted to drive a Mercedes-Benz SL 500. Don't ask me how I knew that at the age of 5, but I did. It wasn't until I began the college application process that I noticed all of the inequities. Even though I had one of the highest GPAs in my graduating class, took all Regents and AP classes in high school, I was still guided only to apply to local and community colleges. Ultimately, I chose to go to an HBCU, Morgan State University. I was so tired of being the only Black girl in class and wanted to be with other people that looked just like me. And throughout my time at Morgan and in Baltimore, I began to get distracted. Like most kids do, you get away from home where you have a lot of restrictions, and I was sheltered. And so I get to a city with no parents and no restrictions. And so it was a huge culture shock for me. And I felt as though I didn't fit in. This is what led me to straying from my academic goals into selling drugs, and which eventually landed me in federal prison. And once I was there, I noticed that the only educational programs offered were GED and ESL. And if one wanted to pursue their higher education, it was through correspondence. And that women, because I was in a women's prison, they were given access to knitting, crocheting, plastic canvassing, beading as continuing education courses. And I thought to myself, well, how is this going to provide an equitable opportunity for someone to be able to transform their lives upon release from prison? Unless they wanted to start that type of business, and without actual business courses, there would be nothing that they would be able to do. But because I had support from home, I began taking classes at New York Theological Seminary in Women's Studies. And though understanding I was only one of few, because sisters could not afford to pay for the correspondence courses when they were making 5 cents an hour, had to pay for sanitary products, and also go home to their children. And so upon release home in New York City, I learned that there was college programs offered in prisons, Bard, Columbia, Hudson, Link, and others. And I thought this was incredible. Yet once released, brothers and sisters were having difficulty because their convictions and being accepted into academia, accessing affordable housing, and navigating the various restrictions of parole. And working with scholars like Michelle Jones, Layla Martinez, Dr. Zaria Davis, Dr. San Andres, hearing Sarita Stibe speak about her experience having to apply to college, being denied access once you check the box, and then not checking and being accepted. I partnered with Education Trust to have a speaking event lifting the voices of formerly incarcerated women around the barriers of higher education. And so as a proud member of the Unlocked Higher Education Coalition, it is the work of these sisters and brothers and others across the country lifting their voices, drafting legislation, and advocating for fair and equitable opportunities for all people. Education is a human right. Everyone should have access, irrespective to whether they're incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, or systems impacted. And like Noel said earlier, whether they've been convicted of any type of crime, if you will. It does not matter. Education is and should be a basic human right. It's them and one of my mentors, Susan Rosenberg, who have spent their lives both in darkness and in light, ensuring that sisters and brothers have opportunities to transform their lives through higher education. So by supporting this coalition, it is necessary. And I ask and encourage that everyone who listens to these experts, please take their guidance. Become a member, join the movement, and engage. Be a key stakeholder in unlocking higher education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Topeka, for just your comments and your wisdom, and just sharing your experience and how this is such an important issue that we're tackling. We are going to now hear from our panelists for today. We are going to start with questions that have already been pre-written, and we ask that you if you have any questions for the panelists to put in the Q&A section that is here. There is a poll that just popped up, and we're going to ask that you please complete that. Our team will be monitoring the Q&A section as well as the chat, but again, for specific questions, we ask that you put them in a Q&A section just so that we're able to make sure that we have time to address them. So just in introducing our panelists, and then we'll get started with the questions. First, we have Reverend George Chochos, is the Senior Federal Policy Associate at the Vera Institute of Justice and the Director of Prison Ministry at Emory Fellowship. Prior to joining Vera, he served as a founding program manager for the Georgetown University Pivot Program, a first of its kind reentry and entrepreneurship program where formerly incarcerated DC residents can earn a certificate in business fundamentals and entrepreneurship through Georgetown's McDonough School of Business. George is also a returning citizen who spent 11 and a half years in New York State prison. And while in prison, he earned a bachelor's degree from Bard College through the Bard Prison Initiative and a master's degree from New York Theological Seminary. Upon his release in 2011, George was accepted into Yale University's Divinity School, where he earned 2 graduate degrees as well as one of Yale's top honors, the Wilcott Calkins Award. His life journey has been chronicled on PBS and on NPR, as well as in the Harvard Political Review and in an award-winning article, titled From Jail to Yale. So again, he has an award-winning article titled From Jail to Yale. George is also a PhD student at Georgetown University, where his research topics include, among other interests, theology and mass incarceration. So we want to welcome George. We also have Marcus Bullock, who is an entrepreneur, justice reform advocate, and public speaker. He is the founder and CEO of Flick Shops. Following his 2004 release from prison and running a successful construction business, Marcus launched Flick Shop, an app that enables incarcerated people to receive personalized postcards from their families, building community and decreasing recidivism. He is also the founder of Flick Shop School of Business, a program that teaches returning citizens life skills and entrepreneurship. He is a Techstars alumni, as well as was selected as one of the Roots 2019 100 most influential African Americans in the US. Shortly after, Bullock was named also a 2020 Halcyon Incubator Fellow. He is a member of the Justice Policy Institute's Board of Directors, the advisory board member for Princeton University's Prison Teaching Initiative, as well as serves as an advisor to the Georgetown University McDonough School of Business and Aspen Institute's Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund. Wow, we have some awesome panelists today. So I want to welcome both George and Marcus, and looking forward to this conversation with you all this afternoon. And just once again, if you all have any questions for either of our panelists as we go through, we want to make sure that you put them in the Q&A section. And I know that, again, the results just popped up for the poll in regards to the questions that were just asked. So we're going to get started, and I'm going to start with George. And this question is for both of our panelists. So just describe for us what your experience was like in school before you were incarcerated. So did you enjoy school? Were you encouraged to pursue school? And was education a priority for you all?
Thank you for that question. Again, it's an honor to be part of this historic panel. Also to my friend, Marcus Bullock, it's so good to see you again, especially from our time together in Georgetown University in the Pivot program. So, growing up in Albany, New York, neither of my parents had attended, didn't have a post-secondary education. And so while education was encouraged, it was difficult for them, I think, to help me succeed because of their own limited access to education during their lifetime. And so as I got older, the challenges in school became greater, and it was difficult, I think, for them to help me navigate through those challenges. And so that's in part, I think, what led to allowing me to make certain decisions that weren't beneficial to myself and my community when I got older.
You know, it's interesting, George, to hear your background. Like, so interesting enough, like, so my mom was super adamant about my sister and I, and us, you know, following in her footsteps of being an educated academic, right? Like, since we were in elementary school, she was adamant about this. And I never really understood why. One, because school came really easy to me, and it didn't make sense for me to study. Right? It makes sense to me to understand why it's important to study. Why it was important to read these books that my mom would give me on the weekends. I wanted to play Nintendo and Sega Genesis like my best friends. You know what I mean? So like me being a part of the space that she was in, and she wanted to climb up her collegiate academic career, it wasn't an aspiration for me. It wasn't until I actually went to prison, and we can talk about this in a bit, but it wasn't until I actually went to prison where I understood the value of the education that I was receiving, formally and informally, but also like what that would mean and how it could help contribute to the legacy that my mom wanted to create for my sister and I. I'm excited to be able to be on the other side of that now, and to be able to impart the same wisdoms that my mom wanted to give to me and to my own children. But as they continue to climb up, I think I'm able to have a different conversation, especially as we weave in tech into that conversation, right? Like, what is the, you know, how does the technology feels, you know, how does it expand opportunities for education? What does that mean for for the future of education? And then the value prop that we're going to have as we all lean in toward what tech is doing for all of us as we create community together. Because I think that we can't lose sight of what these academic institutions are delivering as a part of the community.
Absolutely. Thank you both for that information, just as far as your upbringing and kind of how it's gotten you in this space now. So the next question is, when you all were incarcerated, did you see that there were more opportunities for your white counterparts to obtain education in prison compared to those who were Black and brown within the system that you all were in? We can start with Marcus with that one.
Yeah, I'll start. So if I'm being honest, no, I don't think so, right? I mean, I was in, all maximum security prisons where, the access to an opportunity to walk into a classroom was challenging for anyone on that compound, right? Whether or not it was because it was a smaller classroom that didn't have a ton of different, opportunities, or whether it was because you had to be infraction free in order to be able to participate in one of these classes. Any one of those, a list of barriers, potential barriers that would have been created or erected as a result of someone just saying, look, I don't care what program it is, I just want to get out my cell. And I think that what happened later on, being inside of some of those cells, were like, oh man, you were a part of the elite if you could get inside of one of the classrooms. So whether or not you were black or white or brown, like it was like you were a part of the haves if you could get inside of the classroom. Getting boxed out of those opportunities, I just didn't see it, you know, and maybe it's my radar wasn't up, right? But at that time, I just saw it as everyone had I'm talking about a real challenge into getting into one of those classrooms.
George, did you want to speak to this? I know we're having a lot of conversations about racial equity and things like that. So some of the questions are kind of geared in that space. So please feel free to include any other insight you have.
I just want to make a couple points. Number one, I don't recall there being a heavy, I would say a significant difference in terms of access to opportunity. I do remember seeing, you know, just a difference in how white and black and brown people were treated within the facility. There seemed to be certain privileges that our white brothers and sisters seemed to have that our black and brown brothers and sisters did not inside of that space. But also I would suggest that we know that the representation of just say black Americans inside of prison, they make up around 33%. We make up 33% around the prison population. But black Americans inside of prison that take part in Second Chance Pell only make up 30%. So if you think of in terms of the amount of representation inside of prisons, so black Americans make up almost 3 times the representation that is society. And so that we would need roughly around 60% of the people in access to Second Chance Pell to actually make up for that shortfall there. So I think we need to expand access to higher education in prison. We need to allow access to more black and brown people inside of our prison systems in order to address, I think, some of the historical social inequities that we see in society.
Thank you. So,
you know,
go ahead, go for it.
Can I jump in on this one?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm super grateful for George pointing that out. The reality of it is that just anecdotally and just like really short words, like there weren't a lot. I mean, there were way more black people in the rec yard than there were just white people in the rec yard, right? And I'm at a maximum security facility, which, you know, also points toward like, you know, sentencing disparities and how we think about the justice system and how it lands people who look like me inside of a rec yard where out of 1,000 people in those cells, you know, like maybe 100 or less were white, right? And so the people that were fighting to get into these classrooms, they all look like me. Right. And so the ones who were able to get inside of the classrooms, interestingly enough, I mean, the ones that didn't look like me that were able to get into those classrooms, they also were able to share stories about their upbringing or the certain kinds of classes that they wanted to take, which is different than the classes that we had to take, just the prerequisite to get into the higher learning education courses. Like those were, it was, again, I talked about how hard it was to get into any class, let alone to get into those others. And so when I think about the makeup of the folks that were on the yard, they just were predominantly black and brown folks.
Gotcha. So, and that definitely is going to play into what it looks like as far as programming wise as well. Sticking with the questions kind of around racial equity, do you all feel like there are challenges with the box on college applications as it relates to black and brown individuals applying versus their white counterparts? So this is obviously post-release and just having that opportunity to pursue higher education. Have you noticed any disparities within the groups?
Well, I just want to point to, I think, a couple challenges. I was on a panel with Michelle Jones, who I think many people know the situation she had with Harvard, I believe getting into Harvard and then having it withdrawn. And so and I've spoken to numerous people that have had issues with getting into programs specifically because of their felony status. Had 4.0s in their undergraduate and graduate work. Many people that I've tried to help get into spaces like Yale and other colleges that actually had higher grade point averages than I had, and I went to Yale and they weren't able to get in specifically. Well, no one's going to say that the reason why we're denying you is because of your felony conviction, But when it doesn't make sense in terms of the packages that people are bringing to the table in order to get into these particular programs, and then the denial and then lack of substantiation or justification for why you're denying someone with a stellar academic record, but also has a felony conviction. It doesn't just make sense there. And so I do think we need to ban the box on college applications, let someone's educational experience speak for themselves, and that should provide the justification for acceptance into these institutions.
Marcus,
You know, it's interesting to hear this. Yeah, you know, let's drill it all the way down. Look, I have 62 college credits, and I got them all while I was at Brunswick Correctional Center. And this came as a result of Brunswick Correctional Center was in Lawrenceville, Virginia, where I spent 4 years at that one facility. I was able to get those credits as a result of a partnership program that was a pilot from Southside Virginia Community College. Now, I was there to get my associate's degree. And I was there for so long, even at only taking 2 classes with 3 credit hours per class, I was able to get all the way to 62. Now, in order to be able to complete, I needed 64 in order to be able to get the associates. Right before, in the middle of that class, in the middle of one of my science classes, where I had a 4 credit hour course that will allow me to be able to graduate, is when I got transferred. They told me they came and banged on my door in the middle of the night and said, "You're getting transferred, and you're going to St. Bride's Correctional Center." Now, obviously, St. Bride's didn't have this similar to college program, so I couldn't transfer. And then I got transferred to another facility where I ended up getting released from finally a couple of years later. Now, when I came home, I still had 64 credit hours. And I wanted to go back and apply to go to a community college to be able to get the last few credit hours that I needed in order to be able to graduate. And as soon as I got there and I saw the first question on that application that had, several questions down said, "Have you been convicted of a felony?" To be honest, you heard about this in jobs and employment, but I had never even considered this as a potential barrier for education. And so when I was declined by the community college for, enrollment in that science class to be able to complete, my mind was blown. And that was a turn-off moment where I was like, you know what, forget it. This is going to be the rest of my life. The rest of my life, I'm going to have to fight to try to figure out how to not only be able to get a job, but even to be able to get an education. And if I can't get either, it's likely that I'm going to go back to prison. And so I went to the lowest common, I attacked the barrier that had the potential highest success rate, which was getting a job. Now, since then, I had gotten a job and I started a couple of businesses that then pushed me further and further and further away from the opportunity to be able to get that associate's degree. Today, I've been home since 2004 and I still only have 62 credit hours. It's heartbreaking for my mom to know that the last graduation that she's seen for me was when I was in 6th grade. And she had the opportunity to be able to potentially see this again as one of the rewarding moments of my release. Until this day, we still haven't seen that happen. Now, to the credit of other college universities who are a little bit more forward thinking and progressive than the ones who I applied to when I first came home, I've known some of my other friends, some of them on the call, who have successfully been able to move forward. But just that one bump in that road, which was a massive one, prevented me from even aspiring to fight past that major barrier. And I'm just hoping after conversations like this, that those folks who are interested in those cells that have those opportunities won't have the same story to tell.
Absolutely. And we've heard a lot in these conversations when we go out in the community and engage people about how people have been deterred, from really pushing it, right? So they either see the question and they just put the application away, they don't even complete it, or if they get told no in one place, they don't keep pursuing it because it is a place of like feeling deterred and feeling defeated in a lot of ways. And so it is so critical that we remove that question, to give people opportunity, because you should not have been turned down solely for that reason. Like they should have, there should have been some other options. And unfortunately, this is what a lot of people are facing. And we hear that story way too often in this space. So thank you for sharing that and just really lifting that up, because I think that is a critical piece in our efforts to ban the box on the state level. and I would love for it to just go across the board. But this next question is just kind of in regards to you all. When you were inside, did you all have any mentors in prison that may have had education, or did you have people that pushed you to pursue your education while you were incarcerated? And if you didn't have a mentor, like what made you decide to pursue your education, and what did you learn about yourself and the importance of getting an education while inside? And we can start with George this time, if that's okay.
Yeah, this is a really great question. This is one of the favorite things I like to talk about when I'm on the Hill, and I talk about why we need to restore Pell Grant eligibility for everyone inside of prison. So when I went into prison in New York, the very first prison I went to outside of downstate, and that's a horrific experience, was Sing Sing. And so I had never been to state prison before in 2000, and the only thing I knew about prison was a lot of people in the county jail that had been upstate before said, George, you're gonna have a rough day because a lot of the programs aren't there anymore, specifically college. So I knew there weren't any college programs. And so when I got to Sing Sing, I didn't know about the Master's of Professional Studies program offered by New York Theological Seminary. But I had to go into this program called Transitional Services. And the Transitional Services room was right next to the Master's program offered by New York Theological Seminary. So I actually walked into that classroom by accident and saw people wearing the same greens that I had on, except they had a black gown on with holding a master's degree. And as a Christian, I thought God was playing a trick on me. Why are you showing me a master's degree when I don't even have 4 transferable credits to my name? And at the time, there were no undergraduate programs that I could take part in. But one of the things that stood out to me was there were a number of brothers inside who had acquired their education before 1994 through Pell, that had associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees. And there were a number of master's degree programs in New York State, including a Master of Sociology offered at Eastern Correctional Facility. So eventually I got sent to Eastern. And one of the things that all my mentors had, the people that, that saw something in me when all I could see was a failure, they saw a leader. They all had acquired some level of education, whether either college credits or degrees, through Pell before 1994. And so that was part of the impetus that moved me to want to even apply to Bard College. I remember having conversations with so many people inside that seemed like they were so tough in their exterior, but were like, man, I don't really know if I could do this, right? Because they never really had access to that level of high quality education. We also learned with people from Eddie Ellis and others that the majority of the communities we came from, number one, they were the poorest, and they had like the worst possible schools that you can imagine inside of New York. And so going into places like Bard and NYTS, while it was challenging, I think it spurred us, number one, to greatness. Number two, to see the world and ourselves in a different way, and the way we could be inside of this world. Number three, to believe in ourselves that we could be more than the numbers that were emblazoned on our chest. And number four, to have an impact on our community, and specifically on our families and our children. And so when I got out and I heard about this position at Vera, I thought, what a way to give back to all the men who inside of prison were way smarter than me, greater drive and determination. They just didn't have access to the education I had. Many of my mentors had life. Actually, the other thing that they had in common was they all had life sentences, whether it was 25 to life, 35 to life, just whatever that sentence was, it had life on the back. And so be able to give back as a way to those people that poured into me, so that way I can offer that same opportunity so other people's lives, communities, and families can be transformed. It's just an honor.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, when I think the question around mentorship, like I became a man in prison. I went to prison as a 15-year-old kid. I carjacked somebody in a shopping mall parking lot, got sentenced to 8 years in adult maximum securities. And so because of the way the judge sentenced me, everybody around me had, 50 plus, 70 plus years. My best friend, my cell partner, he had life plus 43. When I first met him, I had just turned 16. I had been in prison for a little over a year. And that friend is one of the people who continue to pour into me over and over and over again, while I was becoming more hopeless and depressed every day as a result of me realizing, like, oh snap, I'm actually gonna have to serve all 8 of these years inside of these prisons. He and a couple of others were the ones that were there to saying, like, dude, you're gonna make it. When you come out of this, you're literally gonna be 23 years old and you still have the rest of your life in front of you. How are you being thoughtful about moving forward? What are some of the things you're going to do during this time? So that, the famous quote, right? You got to do the time and don't let the time do you. What are these things that you're going to plan for during your post-release And they probably didn't say it that way, but they were like, look, what you gonna do when you get out? This your time right now to be able to plan for that. And so what I learned along the journey was, while I probably didn't call those men at that time mentors, I called them just my friends. They were part of my peer group. They were also the ones that were instilling so much in me along the journey that helped me learn how to prioritize the things that will allow for a potential success story once I got through prison. And out of prison. In fact, it probably wasn't just when I got out of prison. Along the entire journey, it was like, now you taking this class, what other certificate are you going to get? What are you going to be able to report back to your mom when she comes to see you in the visiting room? See, most people think that a lot of the accomplishments that we work toward in prison are solely for us, selfishly for us. But more times than not, while you're sitting in that cell, you're looking for that validation that this time that you're doing is not being wasted away, and ensure that you do have the possibility of success after you get released. And so we think about the accountability partners like my mom and my sister and some of the other people who were relying on me to actually go back into these classrooms in between count times while I was sitting in those cells. And so those friends who I can now look back on and say that they were definitely pouring into my life and leveraging their own stories to be able to tell me why I shouldn't create the same mistakes in my life that they did in theirs, they were definitely my mentors. And I'm super grateful for them. In fact, one of the things that we try to do, wholeheartedly on this other side of the wall, is be able to change the narrative around folks that are still sitting in there, and making sure that people don't see them as like just folks who are sitting in the cell or just monsters who are there with inmate numbers. Now, these are real people, real men, real women that are sitting there and want everyone around them, well, a lot of them, they want everyone around them to be able to be successful. We all wanted to see each other win inside of those cells, and I'm grateful for the mentors that showed up in my life.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you, George. I think that a lot of times people don't understand those relationships that we build when we're inside, and just the impact that it can have on our lives. And so thank you for lifting that up this afternoon. And this is just so critical. So our next question is kind of connected to what you were just talking about, Marcus, as it relates to family. So how did your pursuit of your education impact your family? So while you were inside and pursuing your education, how did your family respond? And, even moving forward in your quest for education, how has your family responded to that? And so we can start with Marcus, and then George, if you want to pick up, that'd be great.
My family leveraged that opportunity that was like my social proof. They were able to not only talk about it amongst each other, but anyone who would have a listening ear when they listened to them brag about the things that Marcus was doing in prison to help prepare him for release. Like, they leveraged that as the social proof and said that he's doing it. And I'm grateful for that, because it definitely signaled that they believed, they understood that no matter what decision I made when I was that 15-year-old kid, there's still a possibility for better life after this. And I'm grateful for that opportunity. Even that we didn't get finally didn't get that final associate's degree. Those 72 credit hours helped prepare me in an interesting way. Oh, and also it allowed me to be able to use words like achondroplasia inside of a sentence because of that science class that I missed. And that was dope because, my family was like, oh, he's actually learning something. That was actually a vocabulary word in that science class. I'll never forget it.
Gotcha. Thank you. George, what about for you? How did your pursuit of education impact your family?
Yeah, this is a very personal, this is like a deeply personal and somewhat emotional question, because my father, my brother had taken his life, and so he wasn't around anymore. When I went to prison in 2000, my father had died 2 years after him. My brother died in 95. My father died in 97. So it was just me and my mother. And then I went to prison for 14 years. And because of my last name, there's not a lot of people with the last name Chochos. She told me that while I was in, people would come up and ask her, if she was my mother, and she would just look away with tears in her eyes. And so many times family members, they internalize a lot of the hurt and the pain, and they don't really share it, because when we're trying to, if you think of the way prison is just situated, nobody wants to fight on their visits. Nobody wants to fight in their phone calls. So we kind of sanitize these things. And so we really don't deal with many times we don't deal with a lot of the trauma that we're both experiencing as we're going through this. And so a lot of times family members can internalize a lot of this guilt and shame. I've worked with hundreds of family members, and I know that to be the case just from that type of work there. And so also, as I was going through my education, I knew my mother was happy for me. She was starting to get a sense of pride. But all the times that she came to visit me and my family for my graduations, they were there to experience all of my joy, but I wasn't there to experience any of their pain. And so while there was pride and there was happiness for them, but I know that it was also difficult for my family because they're struggling to see the person who's emerging with this education with the lenses I created for how they viewed me from before I went to prison. And so it wasn't until I got out and my mother came to see me graduate at Yale that a lot of the guilt, the shame, the barriers that prison kind of creates, even between family members, started to break down. So education has wide-ranging effects. Last thing, and I'll stop here. When I came home, I found out my mother kept the clipping from when I got arrested. It said, "Bank robbery suspect caught," and she would sit there and look at it every day that she watched TV. I mean, when I got out, the article that you mentioned, as soon as it came out, the first thing I wanted to do, I went and I bought every paper that had the Jail to Yale article because I wanted to give it to my mother so that way she would have something else to look at to counteract the negative memories that she had from my previous actions. And so it really transformed our relationship. Even to this day, she's just super helpful. The conversations have changed. We no longer talk about the pain of prison in the past, but we talk about hope for the future. And because I'm a good Baptist preacher, I close at least 3 times, so I'll end here. A couple years ago, I have a son who's 26 now, and he's pursuing a PhD at SUNY in New York. I won't say which one in case he's listening. But I didn't see him from the time he was 3 until the time he was 21 because his family, they didn't want him to have anything to do with me because of the life I was living, the fact that I was incarcerated. And so when my son's mother looked me up online, she couldn't believe that I was at Yale, so she actually called to see if it was true. We got married the following year. My son was my best man at our wedding. And now we have a relationship that you would never even know that we didn't speak for those years. So higher education just has wide-ranging impacts on families. That is going to impact not just the current generation, but generations to come.
Thank you all. Wow, both of you have such powerful stories, and I just appreciate being in this space with you all. We have 2 additional questions, and then we're going to try to get to the questions that are in our Q&A. So the first one is, if states pass the ban of box legislation and reinstate the Pell, who do you think would be responsible to let potential students inside know? And then how far do you think the system or institutions should go to implement progressive educational programs? And we can start with George, and then Marcus, if you want to jump in.
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the most intractable characteristics that is evident everywhere in our prison system is the lack of access to information, particularly information that directly impacts people who are incarcerated. I'm talking about the information that people incarcerated have access to. And so, for example, I had been in jail for almost 3 years, and I didn't know about the Barred Prison Initiative until I got sent to Eastern Correctional Facility. So it's not like I was trying to get to Eastern Correctional Facility because I knew Bard was there. It just so happened I got sent to this prison and I found out about the educational opportunity. And then it was, well, how do I navigate getting into this? And that was a whole process in and of itself that actually took 2 cycles in order for me to get in. And so I don't think that we can take for granted the fact that if Pell passes, and even if colleges are going in and offering programs, that somehow that information is going to get to the cell blocks, it's going to get to people who could have access to this. And so for those of us that are in this advocacy space, and even the colleges that offer college programming inside, we can't take for granted that the system is going to disseminate this information in a way that makes it to the people who can have access to this type of programs. So I think we need to be proactive. And so while I don't think that we have the full responsibility, I think the facilities have a responsibility, but we just can't assume that they're going to actually get the information out. Number 2, there's some responsibility on on the college and prison programs to get the word out, but we also can't assume that they're going to be able to do this in a system, in a prison system that has almost 2.3 million people, 1.5 million people in prison, in federal and state prison. And so if we think of just how much information needs to get to so many people, I think we as advocacy groups should also feel a level of responsibility to do what we can to make sure that the information, not just that it's available, but how do you access it? How are you going to have to now, we think of there's been issues with Second Chance Pell and with FAFSA and other issues. So it's like, how do people navigate just not knowing or just having access to the information, but then how do you take advantage of it in the context of being in the particular prison that they're in?
I agree wholeheartedly, with George on this one. And it's one of the, positions that we find ourselves in at Flickshop, trying to figure out how to be able to connect not only families back to their incarcerated loved ones, but also for businesses and organizations, and specifically as part of this conversation, education institutions as well. For those who don't know what Flickshop is, we're famously known as the Instagram for prisons. You take a picture, add some quick text, press send, and Flickshop sends an actual postcard that looks like this directly to any person in any cell anywhere in the country. One of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is trying to figure out how to be able to connect people back to real active resources inside of their local communities, and leveraging ad tech to be able to do that. And what I imagine, as I'm excited about organizations like this one that was by Jubilee, that Flickshop was created by an organization called Jubilee Jobs here locally in DC, as they learned about ways to be able to help inform people that are going to be coming back to the community here in DC. They let them know about job opportunities that are available to them well before they come home as a part of during their incarceration process. And I imagine us being able to find ways that we can do the same thing with these education institutions, because like George says, it's interesting that, I was in prison for 8 years, and as I meet people inside of this advocacy space and the reform spaces, whether or not it be centered around academics or employment or housing or other reentry planning programs, I'm sitting there, I'm like, yo, where were you when I was sitting in cell C12? Like, I promise you, I would have leveraged everything that you had for me if I had even known that you exist. Right? And so we want to be able to bring these organizations and businesses out of obscurity and figure out how to be able to create a communication pathway for them that they can do it at scale. I hope that we're able to do it successfully with Flickshop, but it's one of the things that we're going to be attentive to in the next coming years, especially if we're able to see Pell be able to be extended to the people that live in the cells.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So this is our last question that we had, and I think it's important. So if you can speak to legislators and advocates right now, and using your insight and experience, why is this issue so important to you, to our incarcerated citizens, and to our communities? And then we're going to go to our Q&A area. So Marcus, if you want to, since you're not muted, if you want to start. So again, if you can speak to legislators and advocates now on this issue.
Yeah, look, I'm a real person. Let me look right directly into the camera. My mama would say that I'm her baby. I'm a real person. My wife's name is Andrea. My son's name is Marcus Jr., and my daughter's name is Aya. I'm one of countless people who have real families with real plans and real desires to be able to come home and be successful after prison. I'm not a unicorn, I'm not an anomaly. There's a bunch of talent that are sitting in those cells. The reality of it is that the lack of access to each one of the people, the access to the opportunities is lacking. We want to be able to try to figure out how to be able to make that happen at scale. And with your help, we can actually make that happen. This is a real plea from a real person who sat in cell C12, B13, D19, 126. And I prayed for moments like these. This is my moment to be able to tell you that I'm a real person that definitely would have loved to be able to let my mom see me graduate with those 64 credit hours and that associate's degree. How do we shift that problem so that people behind me are not having the same one?
I don't know how to go after that, but I'll do my best. Thanks, Marcus. I made this point before, but I'll reiterate it. I left prison with people with greater intelligence, greater drive and determination than me, that just didn't have access to the opportunities I had. And I wonder, you know, what they could do, how their families and communities would be impacted, and who we would be as a society if people had access to high quality education, the same means of upward social mobility that we want for ourselves and for our families and for our loved ones out in society. So the prison population, if we just think about it, in the US is bigger than the population of the states of Wyoming, Alaska, and Vermont combined. It would actually be the 5th largest city in the United States. Think of the human capital, the intellectual capital, the social capital that is untapped. I know what this education did for me, my family, and my community, and want that for everyone. So does punishment for punishment's sake accurately reflect who we are or who we believe we should be as a society? You know, isn't capacity for human flourishing the better societal ideal? And if our country wants to affirm that all people are actually created equal, in quotes, and endowed with an unalienable rights, in quotes, we don't forfeit our humanity when we enter prison. And to live up to our best ideals, we want access to quality education for everybody, because what we do in prison reflects more of the inhumane nature on us than what it says about the people inside of prison. So people in prison are wasting their capital, but also here's another reality. The reality is white Americans have 20 times the net worth of Black Americans, and 34% of those have negative or zero net worth. And if we think of how historically Black and brown people were excluded from means of upward social mobility and wealth generation, what better way to address some of these historical inequities than providing high quality education that just not impacts the individual and their families, or actually produces what their families and communities need while people are in prison, but also meets the needs of society when they're released. And so I think higher education in prison is a no-brainer. It's a humanizing element and a humanizing institution that has wide-ranging impacts across the board, has huge societal impacts, just not at the community level, at the individual level, at the societal level. And I think we all are in a win-win situation when people have the access to capacity to human flourishing. And what would it say about us if we're actually negating the capacity for human flourishing for people, but want it for us, for others, but also want it, but then turn around and want those same opportunities for ourselves?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you both. We are going to take a few questions from the Q&A section next, and I am going through, I'm trying to see as they came in. We have one question that asks, do you think that people's experiences in K-12 impacted their interest in school inside? So their experiences in the K-12 system, once they were incarcerated, do you feel like it had an impact on their interest of school once they were inside the prisons?
I'll be quick since my mic is hot right now. And that last question got me feeling like preaching around here, but I'm going to do my best not to. Before I got into prison, when I went to Clinton Correctional Facility, because I had acquired, I graduated from Street Academy, and it was a school for, I don't like the word at-risk youth. I like youth with potential. And so that's the school that I actually graduated from. And so I had somewhat of a high school diploma, somewhat. And so I was able to get a job inside of prison as a teacher's aide. And the job I got as a teacher's aide was in ABE 1, Adult Basic Education 1, which was, in every prison I was in, the largest class. So you had ABE 1, ABE 2, then you had pre-GED and GED. ABE 1 means that you have a reading or math level between kindergarten and 5th grade. Kindergarten and 5th grade. That was the largest class inside of all the prisons I was in, which means the majority of people who were Black and brown that look like me or darker were in those classes. And so I would suggest that doesn't show a failure on their end, because they were children growing up in this. Yes, they're men inside of prison, but they were children growing up in these educational systems. I think it was a societal failure. It was an educational system failure. I know that if I went to Yale and now at Georgetown, if people were going through those programs and either they were failing out at a particular rate or not achieving certain particular standards, yeah, they would ask what's going on with the students, but they would also have, I think, critical questions and pointed questions for what the people in the system are doing. And so one of the things that I noticed with a lot of the men that I work with is because of their early educational experiences, being felt like they were stupid for some reason, that there was something wrong with them, not having access to the types of educational, I'm trying to think of the word I want to use, but the type of services they needed in order to thrive at a younger age. It definitely impacted how they thought what they could accomplish now that they were older. And so a lot of people in prison didn't see themselves going to college because they had been told for years, they internalized, I think, the system's view of them as something less than and not capable of being able to thrive in this particular educational sphere. And so they took that with them throughout their life. But it was amazing that for those of us, and I'll end here, is when we acquired our education, what we did is we went back and actually worked in those same GED programs. And so once you started seeing people getting their college degrees, you started to notice that people were moving, as we went back and worked in these programs, people were moving faster through the AB programs to get their GED. The GED scores were higher. There were more people applying for college because they saw themselves in a different light, just from having, number one, someone who cares, but also believing in themselves that they could achieve on their educational goals that they put forward for them. So, I mean, this has wide-ranging impacts across the prison educational system.
You know, I couldn't agree with George more. I mean, I won't even belabor it. Anything I'll say now will be, you know, redundancy. But I will say that absolutely K through 12 matters, no question, because the same things that you feed children, the same things that you feed the children, and I saw this, right? The same things that the teachers and administration would feed me and my sister and I when I was going through elementary school, middle school, when I finally got into high school. Like, it was it was like, hey, welcome to this. Let's see if you can catch up. Welcome to this. Let's see if you can perform. And it wasn't like, hey, you know, welcome, like, we're in this community, we're going to rally together to make sure that you crush it here. And honestly, it mimicked exactly what happened when I got into prison. The first thing that someone told me when I got into prison, it was a sister warden that happened to be walking down the hallway when I was getting showered. They stripped me and said, hey, take off those clothes, those county jail clothes, and put on these state blues. And the sister warden looked at me and said, oh, I see on here that you're 15 years old. Welcome to the big leagues. Now you're going to see what it's really like to be able to be in prison. And it was like, it created something for me. That was the very first thing that someone said to me when I got into a prison, right? And that doesn't contribute to me wanting to perform, right? And so, or to seek out the mentors or the educators that will help me prepare for a successful release after prison. So I won't belabor that point that George made, but absolutely 100% it matters.
I can make one quick. If we think of the majority of people that were in prison, at least when I was in New York, people like Eddie Ellis did studies, and I don't know how representative it was, but I remember one of the conclusions that he came up to was that 70% of the people in New York State prisons, maybe just the prisons he was in, came from 7 neighborhoods in New York City. 7 neighborhoods. Even if that number is not exactly what it is, the fact that it reflects two of the things that all those neighborhoods have in common, they're the poorest, they're the darkest, and they have the poorest failing, and they have the most failing schools. I think if we don't address those inequities that are historically tied to systemic oppression inside of this country, then we're going to continue to be dealing on the back end of these societal problems, instead of getting to a point to where we're dealing with the economic injustices that are happening in these communities, so that way we don't have to have conversations like this. And I'd love to work myself out of a job. That's my goal.
Absolutely. And I think somebody mentioned in the chat, like the intersectionality of all of these things, like how all of these things at some point intersect and engage education system, the criminal legal system, social services, all of these different entities, healthcare, they all at some point have an impact, and especially when we are talking about Black and brown people and poor people. So I know that we have quite a few questions in the Q&A area. I'm hoping that if we cannot get to them just because of time, because we're already pretty much at our time, that we can still have our panelists maybe address them and send them out to those who registered. We need to kind of close out, and I just want to give you both just a minute if you have any final words or things that you want to share with our group. And then we're going to bring it to Noel Vest, Dr. Noel Vest, who's going to talk a little bit about COVID in prisons. So just final words from our panelists. Marcus, go for it.
Sure. So I'll be really quick with this one. I'll say this is, Flick Shop is a result of what it looks like to be supported during incarceration. My mom was there to support me. I had a ton of teachers that were there to be able to support me through my business computer software applications class. That was another pilot program at Brunswick Correctional Center. My English teacher that I talked about, was a teacher at Southside Virginia Community College. She was there to be able to write me along the journey and ensure that I was able to keep up with the pace of the classes during that. This is what support looks like. I mean, this is what the life looks like after prison with the right amount of support. And I'm super grateful for the tens and hundreds of people that have joined the call today, that you guys are here to help support, because I want to be able to be the social proof that it can happen and we're not unicorns.
I'll try to be as brief as my preaching mind will allow me. When I was in prison, when I got into Bard College, it was the first time I found the will to dream in a nightmare. And there are too many people that are languishing in a nightmare of hopelessness in what we call prison cells that are really human warehouses of despair. And I don't know how, I said this in another space, how we expect to take people and put them into a system meant only to break you and expect people to come out whole. And that higher education, I would suggest, is the only humanizing element in a dehumanizing institution. And that it best reflects, I think, the values and the ideals that we say we hold on to, but don't actually do in practice, and offers the best way for people to tap into the human capital, the social capital, intellectual capital. And again, I just think of what it did for me, and I wonder not just who our brothers and sisters in prison who would be with access to this education, but who would we be in society if everybody had access to the means for human flourishing.
Thank you both. You all are such powerful panelists. I'm grateful to be here with you all. We just want to thank you. The chat is thanking you right now. Again, if you all have any additional questions, we have the Q&A. We're going to try to get those to our panelists and be able to send those out since we weren't able to get to all of them. So thank you both for being with us today. Thank you for your wisdom and your insight. And we look forward to working with you all in the future. We are going to now move to Noel Vest, who is going to speak about COVID in our prisons.
Awesome. Yeah, let me be the first to say thank you for such an impactful panel. That was just incredible. And so I'm going to do a quick update on some research and resources regarding COVID in the prison system. So as many people know, COVID may have kind of fallen out of favor a little bit in the media right now, but it has not disappeared, and especially not in our prison systems. As many on this call know, according to the COVID Prison Project, to date, there have been over 154,000 cases in prisons. There are over 12,000 deaths in prison. What that boils down to is that you are 5 times more likely in prison to contract COVID than the general public. And if you do get COVID, you are 3 times more likely to die. I want to bring everyone's attention to a recent publication that was released by the National Academy of Sciences on decarceration during COVID. I will add a link to the chat, and there's both a video and a free download of this publication. It was authored by Emily Wang at Yale and Bruce Western at Columbia. And they do a really great job of capturing all the recent, capturing and reporting all of the current evidence that we have right now on COVID in prisons. And if I can just take and highlight one of the papers that they highlight, is one that I co-authored with researchers at the University of Maryland and the University of North Carolina. In that manuscript, what we did is we showed that the prison system in Texas was able to actually, or the prisons in Texas that were able to maintain their prison population at under 85% of capacity were the most successful in reducing and minimizing both cases and deaths related to COVID. This is very, very important, I would say, mainly because of the racial disparities that in prison that was pointed out by earlier by George. And for policy people on this call, this 85% of capacity should be reiterated to lawmakers and prison officials as much as possible. We want our friends and loved ones to come home from prison, and limiting the impact of this public health crisis is absolutely vital in order to do that. So again, I will put these links in the chat. Please be sure to send this information around to whomever may benefit from this information. And with that, I will send it back to you, Zaria, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Noel. So the next two things we're going to have Jay Holder, who will do our call for letters campaign information, and then we'll also have a quick membership presentation by Dr. Stan Andrees.
Hello, everyone. Thanks to the panelists for bringing a very important voice to this conversation. We're talking about a call for letters. The call for letters is a national initiative that's aimed at bringing the currently incarcerated peoples a voice to the conversations, to the forefront of the conversation about having access, being able to pursue a college education while in prison. Currently, the call for letters have received multiple information from incarcerated people across approximately 16 states. And what these incarcerated individuals, our brothers and sisters, are answering two questions. There are those, the limited few, who are talking about the impact, the blessing to be able to receive a college education in the facilities that they're in. And then there's the more multitude of people who are talking about how not having college while they're serving these long prison sentences is impeding their existence. Reading these letters have opened up my own eyes and made me kind of question my own consciousness and what am I doing with equity and inclusion. So no matter where the letters came from, the one thing that the incarcerated people are talking about right now is being able to actually finally have their voices heard. So what the purpose of call for letters is, individuals like myself who go around and advocate about education in prison. I'm no longer in prison, but it's important for me when I'm sitting and talking to others that I'm bringing the currently incarcerated people's voices into that conversation with me. Now, I had to dig deep and I had to find a way to do more, because we have over 2 million people that's currently in prison, but we call ourselves representatives for the currently incarcerated, but we going inside the spaces and we don't even have 1,000 letters, 1,000 voices, 1,000 opinions with us when we walking inside there. So if anybody wants to get involved with the call for letters to help amplify it, thanks to Vera, they're working on us with some op-eds and some other things to help amplify the voices of the people who we have received letters for. But anybody who says that they are representative of the currently incarcerated people, you need to find a way to get the people that you do know, bring their voices with you, get their letters heard when you're going in here and you're advocating about restoring Pell Grants for incarcerated people.
All right, so I'm gonna go to my share screen here. And before I tell you a little bit more about our membership, I just want to first thank all of our panelists, thank the organizers behind this event today. Very honored and humbled to be here with you all. I'm in lab with some students. So you see me with my lab coat on and mask. It's not that I think we can get COVID over the video here, but unlike some people in politics and that you see out there without masks at certain events, we know that this is real, what we're in here. So you know, I'm in lab right now, but this is no joke. So that's why I see the mask on. And I want to give a plug to, I know if you're on this call, you're probably engaged, so you probably already voted. And if you haven't voted, please go out and vote. So I'm just here closing out in terms of mentioning, before I pass it actually over to Zaria to say the final words, I just want to put a plug in to visit our website, Unlock Higher Ed. We have a lot of useful information on this site in terms of some of the federal things we have going on around Beyond the Box, which you heard Senator Schatz mention, our advocacy around Pell restoration. We're working with over 20 states to pass ban the box legislation at the state level. And as Jay just mentioned, we also have the call for letter. You can certainly visit that to learn more about what we're doing in terms of our issues and projects. We have a number of resources that research and webinars that we hold, and talking points that you can use, as well as getting information in our meeting and events, and how you can take action. I just want to drop a quick plug to visiting. We really can't make this happen. We really use a collective impact model where nothing really gets done without all of us. So to get that done, we really need all of you. So we encourage you to visit the member services tab and learn a little bit more how you can engage with us. You can learn a little bit more about the different ways of participating in the coalition. You can also use this membership matrix to really get an understanding of what the different levels are all, what you have by joining the different levels. So I will just end there and pass it over to Zaria to close us out.
What a wonderful afternoon, and a way to spend it with some awesome people. We want to again thank Topeka Sam for her comments, Senator Schatz for the message that he sent, as well as our panelists, George and Marcus, who their insight and knowledge was just such a wonderful addition to this work in this space. And so we thank all of our participants, as well as the planning team, everyone who was able to come with us today. We know some people had to jump off at 2, but thank you all for sticking with us a little past the time. And again, we just want to encourage you to get involved. We have statewide efforts that are currently going on, as well as the national efforts. And we just know that this is critical, that we unlock higher education and give people access while they're currently incarcerated, as well as post-conviction. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We again just ask that you join us through our Unlock Higher Ed website. We have monthly meetings that are held the last Monday of the month, if you want to participate in those, as well as subcommittees that you can get involved in. And so we thank you all and just ask that you have a wonderful afternoon and stay safe.